Yeah, good afternoon. I am going to start the lecture on transformers. I hope you would like it. And let's start with probably the initial principle of operation, its applications and so on. We are going to start off with the transformers. Why, first of all, we should study about transformers. That is, what are the applications? Why really we should be studying about transformer? Let us try to look at, first of all, the primary application of the transformer. So the primary application is for power transmission and distribution. So power transmission and distribution, if we look at, normally the generation is done for less than 30 kilovolts. Generally, the voltage is not greater than 30 kilovolts. Most of the power stations might have something like 12 kilovolts or 15 kilovolts. Those are the generation levels. If you try to go for higher voltages, the insulation that has to be provided in the winding, that will be much higher. So the coils will become too thick. They may not be able to get into the slots at all. So generally, generation voltage is limited to 12 to 15 kilovolts. Whereas the transmission is normally done greater than 400 kilovolts most of the times. And of course, slowly we are going to higher and higher voltages of transmission, because if we look at higher voltages of transmission, the current comes down. So if the current comes down, there are two advantages. One is I square R losses come down. They are decreased. The second advantage I would say is the wires, whatever thickness we are choosing, that depends upon the current level. If the current is smaller, then the thickness comes down. So if the thickness comes down, then we are going to have less amount of copper being utilized. So that is really, very helpful in terms of the cost effectiveness of the entire transmission system. So we are first of all looking at 12 kilovolts being stepped up to 400 kilovolts. From 12 to 400 kilovolts, it will be done with the help of transformer. And it is all AC transmission. And the transformer will work only if it is AC transmission. So AC transmission essentially can be possible only with the help of a transformer. And once it is transformed to 400 kilovolts and transmitted across the country, from there, the next thing that we are going to see is it reaches probably several transmission lines, and then ultimately it is going to be transmitted throughout the country. And when it comes to actually the distribution center, in the distribution center, I am essentially going to have a step down transformer where probably it will be step down from 400 kV to say 33 kV. From 33 kV further it may be taken to 11 kV. From 11 kV it will be taken to 440 volts and 230 volts single phase. So these are the various step down options. So we are going to have again step down transformer here. So we have essentially step up transformer in the power station and step down transformer in the distribution level. All these things will be working at 50 Hertz. They will not work at any high frequency. So we are going to have essentially all these things as 50 Hertz transformer. Whereas we have transformers at other applications also. For example, for radio transmission, we may require a high frequency transformer. We may require some impedance matching, that is between the input and output impedance. If I have to match the two impedances so that maximum power transfer takes place. So this will happen again if I have a transformer in between. I may also require isolation. That is, if I talk about a transformer, I am going to have a primary winding, I am going to have a secondary winding. There is no common ground. The ground of this, if I call this as ground 1 and I call this as ground 2, ground 1 and ground 2 are isolated completely from each other. They are not going to be together. They are not electrically connected together. That's the reason why we say that isolation can be provided. So any disturbance that occurs here will not affect the disturbance, or it will not affect the secondary side. So the primary side disturbances will not affect the secondary side at all. That is the major advantage of having a transformer. So in all, I can say the transformer essentially has mainly kind of 4 applications. One is for power transmission and distribution. The other one is for radio transmission, where I may have to probably tune the system to a particular frequency, impedance matching, isolation. These are various applications of a transformer. But we are going to mainly concentrate on power transformers in this particular session. So power transmission, whichever is the transformer used for power transmission, that is going to be power transformer. So let us try to first of all start with what kind of construction we have for the transformer and what are all the different types of transformer. So let us just see. If I take a transformer, I am probably going to have a ferromagnetic core normally. The core, I am showing it as a 2-dimensional structure. Actually, it will be a 3-dimensional structure. So let's say I have a square type of core, and I'm going to have the windings wound on one side. I'm showing this as the primary winding. It is excited with the help of an AC voltage. So let's say this is V input, and I'm going to have the output coming up from here, which I call as secondary. Let me say that is V2. So I'm going to have V in as the input voltage, V2 as the output voltage, that is a primary and secondary coil, which is wound on ferromagnetic core. We use a ferromagnetic core because of what reason? I hope you guys are familiar with magnetic circuit. Can anyone of you tell me why do we use ferromagnetic core? So ferromagnetic core essentially has a very high permeability. Permeability is very similar to what we call as conductance. So if I say electric current will pass in a large quantity if conductance is large, right? Or resistance is small. So if I talk about electric current versus voltage, the same way I can say magnetic field lines or flux, right? This will correspond to the permeability. If the permeability of a material is high, I am going to have high flux induced for a given value of current that is being passed through a coil. So let us say I pass a current of 1 ampere. If it is a ferromagnetic core, the flux produced is going to be of a very, very large value. If I try to look at the flux, it is going to be of a large value. What I have shown in red color line, this is essentially flux line. The flux line will be of a large value. Whereas if I have a non-ferromagnetic material, that is maybe wood or something, I'm going to have a very, very small number of flux lines. So if the permeability is high, I'm going to have flux to be high for a given current. So due to the current flowing through the coil, I'm going to have an induced flux, and that induced flux is essentially going to be high if the permeability is high. So generally, transformers are basically constructed using ferromagnetic core on which the windings are wound. So once the ferromagnetic core has the winding and the current passes, I'm going to have a flux setup in the core. That flux is going to essentially change with respect to time. So let us say it is a sinusoidal current. I'm going to have the flux also to be something like 5m sine omega t. Now Faraday's law says that N d phi by dt is the induced EMF. So I'm going to have essentially a flux setup in the ferromagnetic core, which is going to change with respect to time. Because it is changing with respect to time, this coil is also going to visualize a change of flux. So it will have an induced EMF. That induced EMF we are calling as the secondary voltage. So The transformer essentially will induce a voltage in the secondary coil if the primary coil is excited, provided both of them are wound on a ferromagnetic core. This is the basic construction of a transformer. So this can be of two types of construction. One is core type construction, in which I am going to have essentially a core which is probably like a square shaped plate. Of course, I will have several of these plates put one behind the other, because of which I am going to have probably a shape like this. So this is going to be the complete core construction. And I am going to have the coils wound around this. So the primary coil is here, secondary coil is here. So I am going to have essentially in both the legs, the primary coil and secondary coil are put up. Whereas if it is shell type construction, I am going to have essentially an E-shaped core. I would say this is the kind of core I am going to look at. Right? And I am going to have the windings wound here. This may be primary and this may be secondary. And this E-type core will be kind of, put a lid with another core which is essentially rectangular. So this is also a core. This is also a core. So the windings are essentially completely surrounded by iron on both sides. This is also iron. This is also iron. So I am going to have essentially a huge amount of core weight in the case of shell type as compared to core type. Core type, I have two legs. On both legs, I am utilizing them for winding the copper windings. Whereas here I am going to use three legs, out of which only one leg is used for the winding, other two legs are just remaining there. So this is shell type construction. So shell type construction is used wherever we do not want much of air in between. Whereas core type construction is used wherever I do not mind the air in between. Air will cause definitely some amount of leakage of flux lines. I expect that all the flux that is produced by the primary should confine itself to the core itself. But that may not happen. Some of them might escape, which we call as leaking of flux. So leaking of flux happens more in core type construction, whereas in shell type, you would not see so much of leakage. There are other classifications also for transformer. So I told you based on construction, it is core type and shell type. This is based on construction, right? If I try to look at the number of phases, what is there, so the number of phases, it can be a three-phase transformer or a single-phase transformer. It can be single-phase or three-phase. Then I can also have, based on the functionality, that is what kind of application for which I am using. It can be power transformer, which is used in power station. It can be distribution transformer, which is used in the distribution centers. It can be instrument transformer or measurement transformer, which is actually for measuring current or voltage in substations and so on. So this can be potential transformer if I want to use it for measuring the voltage. It can be a current transformer if I am using it for measuring the current. So these are various classifications of transformer which may, be coming in handy later on when we talk about different types of applications. Let's try to look at the principle of operation of the transformer. So let us try to look at the principle of operation. So in the principle of operation of the transformer, let me just assume a core type construction. I am essentially looking at a core like this. I have put the primary winding here and I have applied a voltage of V1. And I'm going to have the secondary winding here and I have to measure how much of voltage is coming out as output here. Now, due to the applied voltage V1, maybe this will draw a current, whatever is the current, maybe I1. Now this current is going to set up a flux in the core. So I am showing a magnetic field line which is closed, having a closed path like this. Now if I have, say, n number of magnetic field lines, the n number of magnetic field lines will go through this side of the core. It will go through the horizontal portion of the core, and then it will go through the secondary side of the core also. So whatever is the flux produced by the primary current, the entire flux will be linked by the secondary circuit as well. So let us say the flux is equal to phi m sine omega t. So if I say n into d phi by dt, that will be equal to n multiplied by phi m multiplied by omega multiplied by cosine omega t. So this is going to be the induced EMF. If I take N1 as the number of turns in the primary, I'm going to have N1 phi m omega cos omega t as E1 or induced EMF in the primary. Whereas if I just replace that N1 by N2, so I can say, if I just say N2 is the number of turns in the secondary, N2 phi m omega cos omega t will be equal to E2, which will be the induced EMF in the secondary. And if we assume that both wires of primary and secondary are hardly having any resistance, then I'm going to have V1 is approximately equal to E1. So because of which I can write V1 by V2 equal to N1 by N2. So I am going to have the induced EMF exactly as per the number of turns in the primary and secondary. This we call as the turns ratio of the transformer. So if I want stepping up of the voltage, I should have the primary winding to be minimal, whereas secondary winding should be much larger in number. If I want stepping down, then primary winding should be larger in number and secondary winding turns has to be less in number, right? So this is how we get step down and step up action. So step down and step up action depends upon the turns ratio, right? It is essentially dependent upon turns ratio. Now that we know the basic equation that governs the transformer action, let us try to get what is the voltage equation of a transformer. So in the case of voltage equation of a transformer, we can just write again the Faraday's law, N d phi by dt is equal to induced EMF. Because this is equal to induced EMF, I can say if the flux is sinusoidal in nature, because we are actually pumping in a sinusoidal current, I can say N d phi by dt is equal to phi m omega cosine omega t multiplied by the number of turns. Now I can write this as N phi m 2 pi f cosine omega t. RMS value of the induced EMF will be 1 by root 2 times the peak value. And the peak value in this case will be N phi m 2 pi f and divided by root 2 will give me the RMS value. So if you calculate this, this will give you 4.44 phi m f n. This is a very, very important equation in a transformer, which indicates that the induced EMF in a transformer depends upon the maximum flux, the frequency of operation, and the number of turns. All three of them are extremely important. This also tells us that if I apply a voltage in the primary side with the frequency f, the secondary side induced EMF will also have a frequency f. So frequency remains the same. Frequency will not change in a transformer from the primary to the secondary. Frequency will remain the same. Voltage magnitude changes. Only voltage magnitude changes. Nothing more than that, right? So this is the basic equation of a transformer. Now that we know the basic equation of the transformer, let us try to configure or at least investigate the basic principle of operation, especially when the transformer is connected with the load. When it is on load, let us try to look at the principle of operation. Let's say I have a transformer again. Let me show only a core type construction. Doesn't matter. And I have the primary winding sitting here. And I have the secondary winding on the other side. What actually I am passing through this is, let us say, a current I. I'm talking about RMS value. That's the only reason why I'm showing it in the capital letters. What I am applying is an RMS value V1. So V1 is the applied voltage and I is the current drawn for establishing the flux in the core. So at this point, I have left the secondary open. So I would say at this point, secondary is open. No load is connected. It is simply open circuited. So what I am seeing is some flux line has been established here. So I am definitely going to have some induced EMF here. So if I have an induced EMF, I would say that is governed by the relation V1 by V2 equal to N1 by N2. This we already talked about. Now let us say if I connect a load now subsequently on this side. Let me call that as some ZL. I am connecting a impedance on the secondary side. So if ZL is connected on the secondary side, then it is going to draw a current, let us say I2. So what the current drawn through the secondary winding is not going to keep quiet. That is also going to establish a flux in the core, because after all that winding is also wound around a ferromagnetic core. When the flux is established with respect to I2, so when I2 establishes a flux in the core, it will definitely not be additive, because if it is additive, the flux will go to infinity. So by Lenz's law, it is going to oppose, it will oppose the original flux, right? So if I call the original flux as some phi m, now phi m is going to be opposed basically by the new flux that is being set up by I2. So immediately the reaction will be phi m will collapse to a low value. Instantaneously it will collapse to a low value. When the flux is collapsing to a low value, originally there was an induced EMF E1 here, there was an induced EMF E2 here. We already said V1 is approximately equal to E1, V2 will be approximately equal to E2. So V1 and E1 were equal to each other. Now E1 would also collapse because the flux has collapsed. So what is going to happen is now E1 collapses. Because E1 collapses, what is going to happen is I am going to have V1 minus E1 becomes very, very large. So the primary voltage originally was being balanced exactly by the induced EMF. Now the induced EMF has come down, because of which this is going to become large. So a large current will be drawn by the primary. A large current will be drawn by the primary winding from the power supply. So what will happen is, this large primary winding current will try to set up the flux once again. So what we said as the flux that has collapsed, that flux will be set up once again so that the operation of the transformer is restored. So I'm going to have again E1 being induced in the primary, E2 being induced in the secondary. So the flux, what I see as the net flux, has to remain as a constant at phi m. So what is going to happen is, if the MMF or the magnetomotive force created by the secondary winding is I2 multiplied by N2, this current drawn from the primary side will be such that I1 N1 will be equal to approximately I2 N2. Only if I1 N1 equal to I2 N2, the new flux, whatever is due to the new current drawn by the primary, will be able to counteract whatever was the current that was being drawn by the secondary side load. So I am going to have a good amount of ampere turn balance, saying that I1 N1 has to be equal to I2 N2. This I1 is the new value of primary current, whereas I am going to have I2 as the load current. Of course, you may ask, originally it was drawing a current of I, and it had a number of turns as N1, and this was what was causing phi m. So I will have actually IN1 plus I1 N1 as the overall primary ampere turns. This will be the overall primary MMF or ampere turns. But this is a very, very small quantity. The current what is drawn by the transformer initially to establish phi m was a very small quantity because the permeability of the ferromagnetic material is high. So I is very small because of the permeability of the core being so high, being very high. So I would say the transformer principle basically rests on I1 N1 equal to I2 N2. So ampere turn balance is the basic underlying principle of the transformer action. Always I1 N1 has to be equal to I2 N2. We say that this is negligible. This we don't care about because it is a very, very small quantity. I, which is actually under open circuit condition of a transformer. So I may specify this as I0, indicating open circuit condition. So I0 N1 is negligibly small. That's what we are trying to get at. Okay. So just to summarize the transformer action so far, I have a ferromagnetic core on which I am going to have two windings wound, one primary, one secondary. The primary winding is excited with a voltage, alternating voltage V1, and it is drawing a current of I0 when the secondary is on open circuit. A flux is established in the core, which is known as phi m, and it induces a voltage called V2. When I connect the load current that is flowing through the transformer, which is I2, is going to create a flux which will kill the original flux phi m. If the flux is killed, immediately this voltage, which was an induced EMF in the primary E1, will collapse. So also will E2 collapse. So now, because V1 and E1 become extremely different, huge current will be drawn by the transformer. That transformer current, if I call as I1, it will draw such a current such that I1 N1 equal to I2 N2, so that whatever was the flux that was trying to kill phi m, that has been nullified by I1 N1. So this is what is the ampere turn balance of the transformer. So from this, I should be able to say I1 by I2 equal to N2 by N1, and already we wrote this is equal to V1 by V2. Yeah, actually there is a question called whether I can explain the phasor diagram on load and no load. We will come to that towards the end of today's class. So I will be doing that probably in the second half of today's class. Right now we are talking basically about the transformer as though it is pretty much ideal in nature. So we are not even talking about resistance drops, we are not talking much about leakage, we are not talking about any non-idealities. So we will be talking about non-idealities in the second part of today's lecture, right? I will definitely come back to the phasor diagram at that point in time. Okay, I hope that answers the question. So this is going to be the basic equation governing transformer action. So this is the basic operation of the transformer. So let us try to first of all look at the transformer as an ideal transformer on no load. When it is on no load. So under no load condition, I am essentially looking at the permeability of the core material is equal to infinity. It is going to be infinite. And I can also say the resistances of the primary and secondary windings are negligible or zero. They are negligible. And we are going to say that there is no leakage. That means all the flux that is linking the primary will also link the secondary. So there is no leakage. So primary and secondary link the same amount of flux. And the fourth one is there are no losses. So these are all basically what are the assumptions we make in the case of ideal transformer. First of all, definitely permeability is not infinity. We all know that. If the permeability is infinity, we are going to have the reluctance to be zero. Right? Because L by mu A, this is what is reluctance. This will be zero. If mu is infinity, I'm going to have the reluctance to be zero. So if the reluctance is zero, even with zero current, I should be able to establish a finite amount of flux. Because normally we are going to write flux is equal to, flux is equal to MMF divided by reluctance. If the reluctance is zero, MMF can be zero, still a finite amount of flux will be there, established with zero current. Right? So we are going to definitely see that without a small current, flux will not be established. So definitely infinite permeability is not true. So according to ideal transformer, I0 or no load current is equal to zero for a transformer. There is no question of any current. The second one I should say is, resistance is negligible. So if resistance is negligible, that means there is no drop in the primary winding and secondary winding. That is when we say V1 is equal to E1, which is equal to the induced EMF. That is, applied voltage and induced EMF are exactly balancing each other because the resistance drop is negligible. That's what we say. And if we are looking at, V2, which is the terminal voltage on the secondary, that will be equal to E2. Of course, this is true in the no load condition anyway, because there is no current in the secondary side. This is definitely true in the no load condition, no doubt. Okay. So under no load condition, I am essentially going to see that whatever is the voltage I apply on the primary side as V1, that induces a voltage secondary side as V2. right? And I'm going to have essentially V1 by V2 equal to N1 by N2. This is very much valid. Now, when I actually connect the load, again in an ideal transformer on the secondary side, we basically said that V1 by V2 equal to N1 by N2 equal to I2 by I1. This is what is the relationship followed, right? Let's say I am having a load ZL connected here. So I'm going to say that V2 divided by I2 equal to ZL, right? If I want to look at this ZL from the primary side, I want to look at this ZL as an input impedance, then what I should do is Z input is equal to V1 divided by I1. But I also know that V1 equal to V2 into N1 by N2. And I1 I should be able to write this as, instead of I1, let me write this as I2 into N2 by N1. Right? So I should be able to write this as V2 divided by I2 multiplied by N1 by N2 the whole square. Right? So this is actually ZL into N1 by N2 the whole square. So when I transfer ZL to the primary side, it is essentially being multiplied by the turns ratio square. So that when I look at it from the primary viewpoint, the same ZL has to be represented as ZL multiplied by N1 by N2 the whole square. This is because the power is invariant. Whether I am looking at it from the primary side, the power is V1 I1. When I look at it from the secondary side, it is V2 I2. And I know that V1 I1 equal to V2 I2. Transformer cannot generate power. It can only transfer power from the primary side to secondary side. So I can summarize the transformer action as mainly maybe 3 points. One is voltage is transformed from a higher value to lower or vice versa, because depending upon the turns ratio. Similarly, I would say current is transformed from a higher value to a lower value again or vice versa. And I should say power is invariant. Frequency is also invariant. So this summarizes the transformer action under no load as well as load condition, provided I am looking at it as an ideal transformer. When I look at non-idealities in a transformer, what are all the non-idealities? That's what I'll have to look at. So in the case of non-ideality, first of all, I have to say core permeability is finite. It cannot be infinite. It has to be finite. So core permeability is finite, which means the current drawn to establish a flux in the core is a finite value. It's not zero. It is a finite value. I am calling that as I0, or let me call that as the no load current. And this is establishing a flux. And when it is establishing a flux, I am going to have N1 multiplied by I0 as the MMF of the primary winding. Right? Yeah. Ratio of the transformer. Ratio to write K. Somebody has asked a question whether we should consider turns ratio or transformer ratio to write as K. I would rather go with N1 by N2 all the time so that I am very clear whether I am talking about the primary turns on the top and secondary turns at the bottom or vice versa. So I would always write not as K, I would rather write it as N1 by N2 or N2 by N1. I should know very clearly whether I am putting the primary turns on the top or secondary turns on the top. Right? So that is the answer to the question who was asked whether K can be specified as the turns ratio. Anything else?
Transformer is magnetically coupled and electrically isolated.
They are magnetically coupled but electrically isolated. Yes, the two windings are magnetically coupled but electrically isolated. See, transformer coils are magnetically tightly coupled. They are tightly coupled because of the fact that they are going through a ferromagnetic core. The reluctance is minimal. Because they are wound on ferromagnetic core, you are going to have very tight coupling magnetically between the two. So the coefficient of coupling will be very close to 1. Very close to 1.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, madam. I am Anil. You tell that transformer is magnetically coupled and electrically separated. There have two types of couplings in our magnetic fields. Is it positively coupling or negatively coupling?
What do you mean by positive coupling and negative coupling?
Hello?
What do you mean by positive coupling and negative coupling?
Yes, ma'am. How do you... I know that I can find it when you have mentioned dot convention, but in case of transformer, we don't mention any dot conventions. If you have same sign in dot, we tell that it's a positively coupling, but you don't have sign in transformers. So that way, how can you find whether it's a positive coupling or negative coupling? I have another doubt. I observed that in case of distribution lines, the size of distribution lines will be lesser than transmission lines. We know that the size of a conductor will be depends on current. In case of power transmission lines, we step up the transformer. That's why we decrease the current. In case of distribution lines, we are using step down. That means we increase the current. Even though current is increases, but our distribution line size will be, thickness will be lesser than transmission lines. I have these doubts. Can you please clarify me?
Yeah. See, your second question, let me address first. When you are talking about a transmission line, it may be transmitting the power of the order of 2000 megawatt, 2500 megawatt, and so on. So 2500 megawatt divided by root 3 times 400 kV is the current that you are going to have. Right? Roughly, if I talk about unity power factor load, root 3 VL IL cos phi is equal to the power. The power, let us say, is 2500 megawatt. So 2500 megawatt divided by root 3 divided by 400 kV, whatever is the transmission voltage, that is going to be the current. When you talk about the distribution side currents are actually going to be smaller because of the fact that the power levels come down. For example, the total power probably consumed by the entire Delhi, because I am sitting in Delhi, I am able to say Delhi will roughly consume 4 gigawatt of power. So 4 gigawatt of power comes into the substation, which is probably at the entry point of Delhi. From that, it will be divided into East Delhi, North Delhi, West Delhi, and so on and so forth. Every one of them will consume probably only, a few thousands of megawatt, not really the complete 4 gigawatt. So 4 gigawatt is being divided into probably 600 megawatt somewhere, 500 megawatt somewhere, 100 megawatt somewhere, and so on. At that level, you have to calculate the current. The power is not the same. Transmission level power is 2500 megawatt, whereas distribution level power is lower because you are dividing it into several areas. So the overall current looks as though it has come down. If you really look at the voltage level, definitely the voltage level at distribution level is much smaller, as compared to transmission level voltage, no doubt. But the power also comes down, because of which the current comes down. That's all is the thing. And the voltage is brought down at distribution level because of safety concerns. We don't want to put the same 400 kV line running through our streets. It is dangerous. It's really dangerous. Whereas the transmission towers are at a much higher height. So it's not a problem. Right? So that is the answer to the first question. The second, whatever is your...
Thank you, madam.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, answer to the other question regarding dot notation. Let me try to draw that and show you. Okay? Let me try to draw that for a minute. So let us, please sit down. You can sit down, no problem. And I am looking at the primary winding wound like this. Okay? And let us say this is my dot here. Okay? So the current is entering like this and I am showing a dot for the winding on the top here. I have the other winding here. If the winding voltage is in such a way that the voltage rise is shown in this direction, then I would say the dot is here. If the voltage rise is shown in the other way around, like dotted line what I have shown, then I should show the dot here. Where the dot is depending, it depends upon the orientation of the winding. If I am going to have, let us say, a 3-dimensional core, let me draw like this. Now if the winding is going like this and then coming out like this, going like this, this is how the winding is. Then I am going to have essentially the current is actually going like this. If it is going like this, then it is going to come around. Then it is going to go like this continuously. So if the current is going like this, in what way the flux will be induced? The flux will be induced upward. Are you getting my point? The regular thumb rule, based on the thumb rule, I should have the current going, the flux going up. So obviously the current that is actually flowing through the secondary winding should induce a flux which is opposing this original flux. This is the flux phi m. The phi m has to be opposed by the secondary current. So that means the current through this has to flow in such a way that it induces a flux in the opposite sense, upward sense. Downward sense was the original flux due to the mutual coupling and due to the primary current. So the secondary current should actually flow in such a way that it is going to induce a flux in the opposite direction. So let us say if the current is flowing like this, it is flowing like this and so on. And that is what is creating the flux in the opposite direction. Clearly, this is at a higher voltage than this. So I am having the dot here and dot here. This is what it is. Are you getting my point? So I have to look at the current orientation and the winding orientation such that the primary flux and the secondary flux oppose each other. They cannot aid each other. As simple as that. That's all is the basic orientation of these windings and the flux respectively. Right? We were looking at the ideal operation of a transformer. Now you are going to slowly look at what are all the non-idealities, and during non-idealities what are all the changes that are going to creep in a transformer operation. So the first non-ideality that you are looking at is permeability is a finite value. So if the permeability is a finite value, I am going to have the reluctance of the core as L length of magnetic field line or flux path divided by mu, which is the permeability. A is the area of cross section of the core. So this is the reluctance of the core. This is the reluctance of the core. Now, if the flux is phi m, which is actually linking both primary and secondary, I should say reluctance of the core multiplied by this phi m will give me whatever is the MMF or magnetomotive force that is needed from the primary side to establish a flux of phi m. So I have to say this is equal to N1 multiplied by whatever is the current that is being drawn from the primary side to establish this flux. So this is essentially the current needed to establish a flux phi m in the core. And because it is essentially a flux or a magnetic circuit, I can represent this by a reactance simply, because all of you guys know that N square by reluctance is what is inductance. I'm sure you guys must have studied this in the magnetic circuit. N squared divided by reluctance is the magnetic circuit. So this is going to be N1 square divided by reluctance of the core, which I call as the magnetizing inductance or Lm. This is what is the magnetizing inductance. Now I can write 2 pi f Lm as the magnetizing reactance or Xm. So this is magnetizing reactance. This is what is the magnetizing reactance. So I'm going to have this as the magnetizing reactance. So how I can show this in the form of a transformer completely is, let me show the transformer primary winding like this. Let me show the secondary winding like this. Between those two, there is an iron core which I can show with two lines. This is a representation of an iron core. Now I'm going to assume that E1 is the voltage induced here. E2 is the voltage induced here. I'm showing dots here and dots here, like what the other student asked as a question. Now I am essentially connecting a source V1 here. It is an AC source, right? Now rather than showing zero current here, I have to show that a particular current is being drawn. So that current I am going to represent with the help of a magnetizing reactance Xm. So I am going to show that V1 divided by Xm is equal to Im, or the magnetizing current that is needed to establish the flux. So I am going to say that N1 Im is the MMF of the primary winding, right? And Rc is the reluctance of the core. In that case, flux phi m is established in such a way that N1 Im divided by Rc equal to phi m. This is how the flux is established. Now, I can say that this magnetizing current is equal to V1 by Xm. So I am essentially representing the permeability, finite permeability of the core with the help of a reactance which is known as the magnetizing reactance. So if I draw actually the equivalent circuit, I should just show it as though there is an Xm here with the ideal primary winding sitting here. So this is ideal primary winding, whereas this is Xm, which is representing a finite permeability, and this is the applied voltage V1. So I can show it as though this is what is Im. The current that is flowing through this is Im. Now, if I practically measure what is the value of the power that is taken up by the primary winding when I am having the secondary open circuited, if it had been a pure reactance, it should have been zero. The power should not have been consumed at all. If I put a wattmeter here, the wattmeter should read 0 if there had been only reactance. But when we actually connect a wattmeter under open circuit condition or no load condition, we would find that the wattmeter reading is not 0. The wattmeter reading is a finite value. The wattmeter reading is going to be a finite value. This is because of the fact that there is some amount of power loss that is taking place within the core, because the current that is drawn when the transformer is completely open circuited on the secondary side, the current that is drawn under no load condition or open circuit condition, that is actually going to be only about 2 to 5% of rated current. I hope you guys all know what is rated current. If I say that it is a 2.2 kVA, 220 volts divided by 110 volts transformer, right? I am going to have the rated current on the primary side to be 10 ampere, whereas the rated current on the secondary side to be 20 ampere. This is what is rated current. So if the rated current is 10 ampere on the primary side, under an open circuit condition of the secondary side, it will hardly draw 0.1 or 0.3 ampere or something like that. Nothing more than that. It will be a very, very small value. So because I am saying that the current is so small, there is hardly any resistance loss in the primary winding as well as secondary winding. It is going to be really, really small. So hopefully the entire loss takes place only in the core. So we call that as core losses. So let us try to expand a little bit upon what are core losses or iron losses of a transformer. This is happening because of the fact that there is magnetic field established within the core, and it is going to essentially create, the movement of domains within the ferromagnetic core, and that essentially causes some amount of work to be done, which is manifested in the form of heat loss, friction and so on and so forth. That is manifested in the form of heat loss. So core losses essentially consist of two things. One is hysteresis loss, the other one is eddy current loss. We call this as core loss or iron loss because it is taking place in ferromagnetic core. Let us first of all try to look at what is hysteresis loss. Let's see first of all what do we mean by hysteresis. The property of hysteresis, let us try to examine. So in the case of a ferromagnetic core, if I try to take a piece of iron actually will have several domains within itself, magnetic domains. So if I just divide that into a few millimeter or few micron thickness, I'm going to have various domains. Each of these domains will have a magnetic moment in all arbitrary directions. So I may have in some of them upward, some of them downward, some of them sidewise, some of them this way. So in all different directions, I'm going to have different domains located. So the net magnetic moment in a piece of iron, in a new sample of iron, is equal to 0. Because if you look at one is upward and one is downward, they'll cancel out each other. One is right hand side, one is left hand side, they'll cancel out each other. All of them are in all different random directions. The random direction of the domain is essentially due to the fact that the electrons in the outermost orbit of iron or ferromagnetic material rotates in a particular direction. They are all rotating coaxially. So coaxially rotating electrons contribute to magnetic moment. Whereas in rest of the elements which are actually not ferromagnetic in nature, all the electrons are not coaxially rotating, they are all vibrating in all sorts of random motions. That's the reason why there is no magnetic moment in non-ferromagnetic material. Only in ferromagnetic material you are going to have magnetic moment in a particular direction. But maybe a few of the atoms will rotate in a particular direction, so that they are going to, the electrons will rotate in a particular direction, so the magnetic moment is oriented upward. In the other case, it is oriented downward. In the other case, it is oriented leftward and rightward and so on. So all these magnetic moments are available inherently in a ferromagnetic material. Now this ferromagnetic material, let us say, is wound with a coil, like what we have done in a transformer. This is wound with a coil. When it is wound with a coil and I pass a current. When I pass a current, there is going to be a magnetism set up due to the current flowing. Maybe it is in this direction. This is the external magnetic field due to current. Now this magnetic field is going to make all these domains which are inherently present also to align themselves. So this is also going to align like this, this is going to align like this, this is going to align like this, and so on. So all of them are going to be aligned along the magnetic field, which is the extrinsic magnetic field. So as I increase the current further and further, this magnetic field strength is going to increase further and further, because of which all these domains are rather forced to align themselves. So if I try to look at what is the strength of B with respect to the current that I am passing, as the current increases, my flux density will also increase. It will linearly increase initially. But once all the magnetic domains are aligned, there is nothing further to align, so it will reach a saturation. Now, it has reached a saturation and there is no more domains to align themselves. At this point, let us say I start decreasing the current. When I start decreasing the current, the extrinsic magnetic field is still there, so the magnetic domains are not willing to budge. They are going to remain in the same direction, and only when I decrease the current to a very, very great extent, it will start decreasing slowly. But it will not reach zero value even when I reach zero value of current. It retains some amount of magnetic field. So this is known as retentivity. It is essentially retaining or remanent flux density. You can say remanence. So it is some amount of flux is remaining, because of which I call that as remanent flux density or retentivity. Now I start increasing the current in the opposite direction. When the current starts increasing in the opposite direction, the external magnetic field also reverses its direction. Because external magnetic field reverses its direction, slowly one by one will start reversing their orientation in the ferromagnetic material. So slowly, they will get into some random motion, and at some point all of them again nullify each other. The flux density becomes zero. Now if I start increasing the current further in the reverse direction, it is going to increase the flux density in the reverse direction and reaches a saturation. Now again, if I increase the current in the positive direction, this is going to go like this. This is what is known as the hysteresis loop or BH loop, where H is actually Ni by L. That is what is H, the magnetic field intensity. So let me redraw this hysteresis loop once again. I am going to have essentially on the x-axis it will be H or I, the current or magnetic field intensity. H is equal to Ni by L. And here it is going to be B or flux. B is equal to phi by A, flux divided by area. Right? Now let me draw the hysteresis loop. When I take a new sample of iron, it would have increased linearly, it would have reached saturation. Once I actually start decreasing the current, it would have gone like this, and it would have gone into the reverse direction like this. And when I do this again, it is going to go like this. This is what is the hysteresis loop. Now, when I actually apply a V1 voltage to the primary winding, which is alternating in nature, it is an alternating voltage. So I'm going to have essentially the voltage somewhat like this. Let me draw the voltage again. So if I draw the voltage on this side, I should show it as though it is a sinusoidal voltage. Right? This is what is the voltage that I'm applying. When I have increasing voltage, it is as good as increasing the current. When I have decreasing voltage, I'm going to probably decrease the current. It goes into the negative direction and again increases in the positive direction. So it is exactly going like this. This is how it is going to be. Now, this aligning and realigning of the magnetic domains are repeatedly done when the current is increasing in the positive direction and decreasing in the negative direction, and then it is going again and again. So the aligning and realigning of the magnetic domains involves the external current doing some work on these domains, and that is manifested in the form of loss. So hysteresis loss is incurred because of physically aligning and realigning the magnetic domains during every cycle. Right? Now, if I try to look at a particular value of current, there may be a small variation, in the flux density. So I am essentially looking at integral of H dB as the work done by the external voltage source V1 on the magnetic domain or on the material, ferromagnetic material. So I have to calculate what is integral H dB, and that integral H dB will give me completely the area under this curve. So BH loop gives me a measure of the amount of energy lost due to aligning and realigning of magnetic moments. And if you actually look at it, please note that the current has reached zero here, but the magnetic flux has not reached zero here. Current has actually already reversed. At this point, the current has already become negative, but the magnetic flux density is zero. The current has become more and more negative. That is when the magnetic flux density is slowly becoming negative. So magnetic flux density always lags behind the current. So this lagging behind is known as hysteresis. Hysteresis in Greek actually is having the meaning of lagging behind. The flux is lagging behind the current, and that is the reason why I'm going to have this much amount of energy. The loop that is actually displaying BH loop, that is essentially the lost amount of energy every time I go from the positive current to the negative current and vice versa. So this loss happens during every cycle. So if I say that BH loop the area under the curve is the energy loss per cycle. Let me try to get a mathematical proof for this. I told you that HDB is the area under that curve, right? That's what we showed. If you may recall, we essentially showed that at a particular value of H, if this is the variation in B, that is dB. So this entire thing is essentially the area under the curve. So let me try to get what is HDB value. So HDB, I can write this as H is defined as Ni divided by L. And dB, I can write this as Ni divided by L d phi divided by A. I can write it like this because flux is equal to B times A, right? But if I write from Faraday's law, I can write that N d phi by dt is equal to voltage or EMF induced. So I should be able to write that N d phi equal to V dt, where V is the instantaneous value of voltage. So I can definitely substitute that here. So I'm going to write this as Ni divided by L V divided by Na. Fine. I have just substituted those values. I can cancel this N and this N, and I can say this is essentially Vi dt divided by AL. A is the area of cross section of the core. L is the length of the magnetic circuit, which means the magnetic field line length. So if I say that this is my core, the average length of magnetic field line is given by this dotted line. Whatever I am drawing is the average length of the magnetic field line. So this essentially tells me it is the volume of the core. So I can say area under BH loop will give me the power loss. Vi is power loss. I am integrating it over time. So it is essentially energy loss. So I should say energy loss per cycle per unit volume. So if I say that my core is having a volume of X meter cube, and if I say that the frequency at which I am applying the voltage or current is 50 Hertz, then I should say hysteresis loss equal to whatever is the area under BH loop multiplied by 50 multiplied by X meter cube. So this will give me essentially joules per second or in watts. So this is hysteresis loss in watts will be given by area under the BH loop multiplied by the frequency multiplied by X, if X is the volume of this particular core. So I would say that in general, hysteresis loss is proportional to frequency. If I operate the same transformer which is meant for being operated at 50 Hertz at 100 Hertz, the hysteresis losses are going to be 2 square times, 4 times. It is going to be very, very large. So what I mean is hysteresis loss, if it is designed for 50 Hertz, I better operate it at 50 Hertz. If a 50 Hertz transformer is operated at 100 Hertz, hysteresis loss will be twice, will become double. Fine. So I have to design a transformer at a particular frequency to be operated always at that particular frequency. I cannot go higher than that. So this is what is the discussion on hysteresis loss. And hysteresis happens only because I am using a ferromagnetic material. If I am not using a ferromagnetic material, I will not be seeing hysteresis loss. I will not be seeing saturation. None of them will be there. There is one more laws called eddy current laws. Eddy current laws is essentially, whatever are the currents induced in the core material itself. The core is made up of iron. So if I say that this is just one thin portion of the core, in this I am going to have the flux going around like this, basically. The flux is going around like this. We have the winding sitting here around the core. Because of the flux, I am going to have an induced EMF in the winding. I am also going to have a current in the winding. After all, the core is also made up of metal. That is a conductor. So obviously the metal will also have an induced EMF that will also have a current. And the metal is essentially a thick piece of metal here. So the current will go in all sorts of direction, crisscross in every way. That's why we call it as eddy current. It is like the water currents. Whatever is happening in the water, you can see water current going all over the place. So we call that as eddy current. So eddy currents are induced in the core material, in the core due to d phi by dt. Just like how that is happening in the winding, the same thing is happening in the core also. So what is going to happen is, if I call that this eddy current is equal to some IE, this is the current that is flowing through the core material. If R is the physical resistance of the core material, then I am going to have IE square R will be the eddy current loss. So if I want to actually reduce the eddy current loss, I should avoid all crisscross currents within the core. I should not have crisscross currents within the core. So for that, what I can do is, I can essentially have very thin piece of stamping like this. Many of those stampings are put one behind the other. Are you getting my point? I am going to have several of them stuck to each other using some resins, and in between I will have varnish. So I am going to have multiple pieces of this. So each stamping has the shape of this square, hollow square. And then I am going to put one behind the other like this. I am going to stick them together. So if I look at it, actually it will look as though multiple number of thin pieces of this square are put together to make the complete core. And in between the two laminations or stampings, I'm going to have some varnish. So core is constructed with the help of laminations with insulation in between adjacent laminations. So what is going to happen is, the two laminations that I have put right next to each other, they will not be able to have a thoroughfare of current. So I'm going to have actually one lamination here and one more lamination behind this, like this. But both of them are going to be insulated from each other. So each lamination will have definitely flux confining it to itself. It cannot go to the next one because in between whatever is varnished, that is going to be having a huge reluctance. So one more line of flux might go through the second lamination. Then the next one will go through the third lamination and so on and so forth. So each of them is going to have their own induced currents, and the induced current will always be perpendicular. So induced current will be at a perpendicular direction. Induced current will be at a perpendicular plane. What I mean is, if I say that the plane of the paper is having the flux line, the current will go into the paper or out of the paper. It can never go, parallel to the flux line. It will always go into the paper or out of the paper. That is how it is going to be. Fine. So I am going to have essentially interrupted paths for the current, because into the paper the current cannot go as a thoroughfare because in between varnish is coming. And similarly, out of the paper also it cannot come because varnish is sitting as, the so-called insulator. So I'm going to have now the currents are having restricted path, because of which the resistance increases, the current decreases. So I'm going to have eddy current losses come down due to lamination of the core or laminating the core. Right? So eddy current losses, if I look at it, I told you that P eddy, if I call this as eddy current losses, is equal to I eddy current square multiplied by R of the core. This is what is the expression. Now this I eddy current is essentially whatever is the voltage induced due to eddy current divided by the resistance of the core, probably whole square, multiplied by R core. Okay. Now this is actually equal to whatever is the d phi by dt confining to every lamination. This is corresponding to every lamination. Right? Whole square multiplied by 1 R, I should say again lamination, because I'm talking about voltage induced in one lamination, resistance of one lamination, and I have to multiply this by R of one lamination, and I have to multiply this by the total number of laminations, because this is probably going to be constructed with the help of hundreds of lamination. So in every lamination I have to take into account how much is the loss. So this is going to be the P eddy in a laminated core. So clearly I'm going to have the resistance of lamination is going to be much higher. This also should be square, because our core square, we had said our lamination square should also come into picture. This will be quite high because you have interrupted the path. So in general, what I can say is with the laminated core, the losses will come down drastically because of the increase in the lamination resistance, and also reduction in the induced voltage, because the flux corresponds to only every lamination. It doesn't correspond to the total flux. So if I have the total flux of 10 Weber, if I have 100 lamination, I will have only 0.1 Weber as the flux per lamination. So definitely I'm going to bring down the voltage corresponding. Right? So now I can say that this dt essentially corresponds to what is the rate of change of flux in a given time. So this will correspond to, actually indirectly it is related to dt is inversely proportional to frequency, and flux is directly proportional to whatever is the magnetizing current. Wants to know about inrush current in a transformer. Right? Okay. Inrush current in a transformer we will talk about when we are talking about again non-ideal case of the transformer under load condition. We will talk about it definitely. If I miss it, please ask it in tomorrow's lecture. Tomorrow afternoon we will be talking about it. Okay. Now, if I say that flux is proportional to magnetizing current, dt is proportional to 1 by f, I can say P eddy is proportional to definitely frequency square. Actually, there is an empirical formula for hysteresis loss as well as eddy current loss. Hysteresis loss, people say, is proportional to some constant, multiplied by B power n multiplied by frequency, where n varies from 1.5 to 2.5 depending upon the material, depending upon the hysteresis loop's size. Eddy current loss, on the other hand, is proportional to again k into B power n. N is again approximately 1.8 to 2.5 and frequency square. So these are two components of the losses that take place in the core. So we call this as core losses. So now to summarize the operation of the transformer under no load condition with non-idealities taken into consideration, I should say operation of an actual transformer. Right? So first thing is permeability is finite. So a magnetizing current is drawn to establish flux. Okay. Second thing I should say is core losses take place in the ferromagnetic core of the transformer. The losses which are taking place in the form of I-square losses necessarily have to be represented by a resistance. I can't represent it by an inductance. And these losses depend upon B, which is the flux density, which means it is dependent upon the flux. And if it is dependent upon the flux, it is dependent upon the voltage, not on the current. So, if it is dependent upon the voltage, and this is also, that is the magnetizing current is also V divided by Xm, this is also dependent upon the voltage, both of them have to come in parallel, not in series. So that is the reason why the equivalent circuit of the transformer under no load condition, we show it with the help of a reactance, which is Xm, a resistance, which is core loss component of resistance. Some people show this as RC, some people show this as R0. It doesn't matter. This is actually a fictitious resistance. That is, it is a not really physically, you cannot measure it. You can only estimate it because it is not really the resistance of the core. It is rather the loss which is representing the core losses that is happening in the core. So I am putting it as an imaginary or estimated value of resistance. And here is my V1 that I am applying. Here is my ideal primary winding. So this is essentially my ideal primary winding, which has infinite permeability core, which has no core losses. Core losses I have lumped and shown in the form of RC, and the magnetizing current it is drawing I have shown in the form of Xm here. Now I will have, of course, the core and the secondary. Right? So this is secondary. So this is the equivalent circuit. So I can call this as the equivalent circuit under no load condition. So this is the equivalent circuit of the transformer under no load condition. At this point, let us try to draw the phasor diagram corresponding to, the no load condition or no load operation of the transformer. Loaded operation of the transformer phasor diagram we will take up tomorrow. But let me probably conclude today's class with a couple of problems discussed, or I'll at least give it to you as a homework. You can try it out and tomorrow we can discuss those solutions. So let me first draw the phasor diagram before we conclude. Let's say this is the voltage that I am applying to the transformer, which I am showing as V1. talking about IM, it will definitely lag behind by 90 degrees because it is an inductive current. So this has to be 90 degrees. If the core is badly designed, I'm going to have a huge amount of eddy current loss and hysteresis loss. So whatever I draw as IC, the core loss component of current will also be quite a large value. So I have IC as the resistive component of current, which is representing core losses. This as the magnetizing current. Now the sum of these two, when I add these two, I am going to get whatever is I0 or no load current of the transformer. This is the overall no load current of the transformer. So if I show that on the equivalent circuit what we drew just before some time, I should say this is my IM, this is my IC, and summation of those two is I0, which is the no load current. So hardly any current is flowing here because there is no current flowing here. This is open circuit. So there is no current on the secondary side. So here I equal to 0. There is no current that is being drawn by the transformer as well. If the second current is 0, the primary current also should have been 0 if it is ideal. But I am drawing some current because I have to satisfy the core losses and I have to satisfy producing the flux because there is no permeability which is infinite. Right? So this essentially tells me that my transformer is not ideal, and also from the phasor diagram I can very well see that the power factor of the no load current, if I try to look at it, it is not exactly at 90 degrees, it is less than 90 degrees. This angle is less than 90 degrees. That is because I'm incurring some resistive losses. Right? Shall we just go ahead and look at a couple of problems? So let me try to take up one problem and I'll give you probably two homework problems which you can try to work out and come back. Coercivity and BH loop. Okay, fine. There is a question regarding coercivity and BH loop. Let me probably take that BH loop diagram itself and then explain coercivity from there. Yes. So here is my BH loop diagram. Okay. So I said that basically if I try to start with a new sample of iron, it is going to start from 0 current and 0 flux. It is going to go towards saturation. It reaches saturation and then it starts coming back. This I said as remnant flux or remnant flux density. What is left over even at 0 current in the form of flux, we call it as remnant flux. But for that flux to be brought down to 0, I need to give this much of current. If I don't give this much of current, I'm not able to bring back the original 0 flux state of this particular ferromagnetic material. This is called coercive force or coercivity. I can say coercive force for any given flux density, but if I had gone up to maximum flux density of the material and I am trying to bring it back to 0 flux density, then whatever is the current that I require to push through the magnetic core winding to bring the flux density back to 0, I call that as coercivity. So the coercivity of the material refers to the current that I need to force through the winding which is wound around the core to bring back the flux density to 0. Have I answered your question? Okay. Another question is, what is the conductor size in the primary of power transformer for high currents? See, it depends absolutely upon what is the kind of, the rating that you are talking about, because the power transformer can be of various ratings. For example, if you look at Ramagundam power station, many of them are 500 MVA generators. So corresponding transformers are to be of 500 MVA rating. So 500 MVA, you can calculate what is the current. Let's calculate. So the current, primary current for a 500 MVA transformer will be 500 divided by √3 into VL. And VL is generally the generation voltage. Generation voltage may be 15 kV. So I should say 500 into 10 power 6 multiplied by √3 multiplied by 15 into 10 power. So you can calculate how much is the current, but we have to rate the conductors always for the peak current. So I have to multiply this by √2 for the peak current. So the conductor sizes will be enormously high, because compared to copper, it is all copper, agreed, but generally we will have, even for carrying 30 amperes of current, we need at least 1 centimeter diameter. So you can imagine, if I have to carry so much of current, then correspondingly the thickness increases tremendously. So it depends heavily upon the rating of the transformer and what is the generation voltage. Another question, but you have not mentioned, may know why. Current equation, eddy current equation involved thickness. See, eddy current equation definitely involved thickness, no doubt. So if I am trying to look at the resistance calculation of eddy current, what we have done, right? We are talking about resistance of every lamination. When you calculate the resistance of every lamination, what are you supposed to do? You have to first of all take the rho of the material, length of the current path, which is actually the thin lamination. If it is, everything is made up of about 1 or 1.5 mm, this L is going to be only 1 or 1.5 mm. And you are going to have the area of cross section. So you are going to have actually the whole thing calculated for every lamination, depending upon the rho of the ferromagnetic material, length of the current path, and area of the cross section through which the current is flowing. So based on that, you will have to calculate the resistance. So definitely the resistance calculation will involve thickness, because the length is decided by the thickness of the lamination as well. So that is how you are going to get this expression, right? What is the fictitious resistance in the no load condition of the transformer? Okay, the fictitious resistance in the no load condition of the transformer is calculated like this. Let's say I have a transformer. I have conducted a no load test on the transformer. No load test is conducted like this. I'm going to have essentially the transformer sitting here, and on the other side I'm going to have the secondary side open circuited, and I'm going to put a wattmeter, I'm going to put an ammeter, and I'm going to put a voltmeter, and I'm going to apply rated voltage. Let's say my voltmeter is reading 200 volts. I have applied 200 volts. Let me talk about a 2 kVA 200 by 100 volts transformer. Okay. At this point, I am applying 200 volts and I am measuring what is the wattmeter reading. If my wattmeter reading shows something like 80 watts, and if I say that the current that is flowing is probably 0.2 ampere or something like that, I am just taking things arbitrarily. Okay. In which case, I can say VI cos phi is equal to 80 watts, right? So I have to write 200 multiplied by 0.2 multiplied by cos phi equal to 80 watts. So I can calculate what is cos phi. So I am getting how much? 200 into 0.2 is 40. So I should have taken a value which is probably higher than this. Let me take 0.8 amperes, because cos phi cannot be greater than 1. So I am taking 0.8. Okay. So I am going to get 80 divided by 160. So cos phi is 0.5. Am I right? Now, we drew the phasor diagram. You recall, this is voltage and I'm going to have Im here and I'm going to have the other one, I naught along this. I naught cos phi is this. So I can calculate now whatever is I naught, that is 0.8 cos phi is equal to IC, which is actually 0.4 ampere. And I can also say 0.8 multiplied by sin phi will be equal to Im. I can calculate this value as definitely. Now I should be able to write clearly that whatever is my voltage applied divided by IC will give me RC. This will give me RC. So RC is that resistance which represents the current that is flowing in the form of resistive current during no load condition, which is catering to the losses of the core. So core losses are essentially represented with the help of RC. I don't know whether I have answered your question. Is it okay? So the time is up. So I'm sorry. Unfortunately, we'll have to stop here. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.